Good afternoon. This is the marquee session for this period. Can we really do nothing about immigration? I'm Peter Scarry. I teach political science at Boston College, and I want to welcome you all to this session. We're privileged to have with us today three highly knowledgeable and engaged persons in the immigration debate. And I'm pleased to say highly knowledgeable and engaged persons in the immigration debate from rather different perspectives, which is not easy to do. And while the individuals here today have been quite cooperative, easy to work with, it's nevertheless taken some lots of conversations and evaluations together to get us all here and to discuss what is obviously one of the most pressing issues facing America today. So without much further ado, I will briefly introduce our three panelists and indicate their institutional affiliation, but I'm purposely going to let them largely speak for themselves to tell you a little bit more about themselves, their organizations, and then they will proceed to address the question that we've convened on here this afternoon. Is immigration an unsolvable issue? Rather open-ended question to which each of them will have their own particular response. So, in order of their presentation, I present to you Jim Robb to my extreme right, as it happens to be, just by chance. Vice President, he's the Vice President of Alliances and Activism at Numbers USA, about which he will tell you more. And then, to his left, Teresa Cardinal Brown, who is Senior Advisor, these are all physical descriptions,
yeah,
of course.
I know.
Senior Advisor on Immigration and Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I should mention that all three of these individuals and their organizations are based in DC. And then finally, to my right, is Diego Sanchez, who's the Director of Policy and Strategy for the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Does that mean you're on the extreme left, Peter? Since you insisted on rolling this out that way.
I was when I was much younger.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Robb. I'm with Numbers USA. We are a 27-year-old immigration advocacy organization with a national membership and lobbying on Capitol Hill and the whole shebang. We organized. First, I'll tell you just a bit about Numbers and then a little bit about me. Is that good? Okay. We organized it after the Barbara Jordan Commission, the National Commission on Immigration Reform, sent its report to Congress 27 years ago, and only some of it was adopted, to our great disappointment. So some of us, Roy Beck, me, a couple of others, organized Numbers USA to try to get through the proposals of Barbara Jordan and in broad outline. And we're still working on that all these years later. And let me just tell you how I got involved and why I'm interested in immigration in the first place. So I moved to Washington for the second time in 1994, late 1994, and I was looking for stuff to do. And I ran into my old friend, Roy Beck, who I said, what are you working on? He said, immigration. I said, well, tell me about it. So he did. And I got started shortly after that writing research articles on immigration. And I've just been in it ever since for going on 30 years. But why I'm interested in it probably comes from my heterodoxy or heterodoxical political background. I'm generally a conservative, but I've got 3 liberal issues: race, guns, and environment. And so I've had this, since I am a Republican, raised in a Republican family, the issues of race and what's happened and is happening to the descendants of the former slaves in America, that is our African American population, has always seemed a burden to me because I went to school just a little over a decade after the signing of the Civil Rights Act, and I didn't see that enough progress had been made for economic opportunity for Americans, blacks, for anyone to be happy with. So I was, in fact, I was a kind of a dissident member of the college Republicans, and with me and one other friend sort of bringing this up all the time. So and I'm struck by this fact. Well, today, for example, just to show you what I'm talking about, average black families' household wealth in America, the net worth is 6%. That's SIX, 6% of that of the average white family in the United States. Not 60%, 6%. So every economic statistic has many things behind it. It's complicated, but obviously we've got a long, long way to go in that department. So, so we had, when in the mid-90s, we were already in the midst of a rapid new immigration wave. And so I became interested in how is this going to affect people who are already here, and including the black population, but also other populations. I became interested in how immigration was affecting the white working class. Now, in recent years, I've become very interested in how it's affecting Hispanic working class. Of the 62 million Hispanics we had in the United States as of the 2020 census, 2/3 were born in this country. And of the others, 8 million have actually become U.S. citizens. And so it's really we're really dealing with a citizen and native population. So many of them also economic activity is maybe not sufficient too. So my interest has been primarily economic, and to give opportunity to people here, and how does the immigration affect them?
Thank you, Jim. It's my fault. I didn't make things clear enough. We're introducing ourselves right now, 2 to 3 minutes. We're not getting into the substance of things. So, Teresa.
We go next. Hi, my name is Teresa. I'm an immigration policy wonk. I work for an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Bipartisan Policy Center. We've been around for 15 years. We are a think tank, which means we research and try to come up with solutions for all kinds of different policy issues, immigration being one of them. By name and by intent, we are bipartisan. What that means is that we actively seek out Republicans and Democrats from all parts of government to try to figure out where they can come to agreement with information that we produce in research. We provide them with lots of information about the system, and we help them come to whatever agreements they can. A lot of what I'm going to say today is stuff that our task forces and groups have been able to come to agreement on. Some of it's my own thoughts. Personally, I started working in immigration in 1990. My first job out of college was working for a company that evaluated foreign educational credentials to see what their US equivalents were for entrance to US colleges or for visa and immigration purposes. That got me started understanding a little bit about our immigration system and how it works. I then went to work for what were majority of our clients, law firms, filing lots of different cases, uh, realizing how our legal immigration system sometimes was just, one, really challenging to understand, but two, had a lot of kind of weird, um, not real world provisions. Like it made people do things that they wouldn't otherwise do just to figure out how to get through the system. Um, I was trying to decide if that meant that I would go to law school or do something else, and a boss of mine suggested, "Well, you're figuring out policy. You should go work in policy." So then I started working in policy. I worked for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the group of people who represent the lawyers who represent immigrants. I then went to work for the US Chamber of Commerce, representing businesses. I then went from there to work inside the federal government. I worked at US Customs and Border Protection, and I worked at Department of Homeland Security under the George Bush administration and the Barack Obama administration. I crossed over. Came out, did consulting and contracting for the government for a little while, and then this position at BPC, Bipartisan Policy Center, opened up, and I thought, there's not a better place for me to continue to work in immigration than in a bipartisan way, because that's where I am. That's why I sit in the middle. Although I was joking to Rob and Diego earlier, depending on what room I'm sitting in and with whom I'm talking about immigration, I'm at the right end of the table, I'm at the left end of the table, or I'm in the middle. That tells you what you need to know about me. And so I come at things from a pragmatic perspective. I have had a lot of different positions that have given me different perspectives on the issue. I joke that about the only job in DC that I haven't done is work on Capitol Hill. And frankly, I'm too old for that now. That's a young person's game.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Diego, it's all yours.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. Diego Sanchez. I'll tell you a little bit about the President's Alliance, and then I'll switch to myself so I can speak freely about today's subject. President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration is an alliance of over 550 college and university presidents and chancellors that have come together some 80 years ago now to work on the issues that are at the intersection of higher ed and immigration. So there are three main populations that we serve and that we advocate on behalf of, and they're undocumented students, dreamers, DACA recipients, refugee students, and international students. We do work at the local level, so we work with campuses. We work with practitioners providing resources and guidance to our campuses. We also do work at the state level. For example, we advocate for in-state tuition, to expand in-state access to in-state tuition for undocumented students. And we also advocate for professional licenses, the ability for folks to be able to enter the workforce, right, when they don't have work permits, looking at other ways that we can support those students enter the workforce. And then at the federal level, we do a little bit of everything, but mainly we engage with Congress normally in a bipartisan way. We encourage bipartisan work. And we also do a little bit of work with the administration, Department of Ed, on the FAFSA issues, talking with the administration about what are some of the alternatives to DACA, right? What are some of the alternatives to the DACA population that we can come up with? And so now I'll share a little bit about myself. I am a proud immigrant. I'm a proud American. I came to the United States in '99 when I was 9 years old. Been here for 25 years now. It's been a long journey to be able to adjust my status. During the pandemic, I lived in Argentina, and part of me was, oh, I can work remotely. So I'm going to go and spend some time with my grandparents while I can. And during that time, I met an Argentinian woman. And long story short, we ended up getting married. She lives over there, and I live over here. Just to give you a little bit of taste of how this process, this journey of being undocumented for 14 years, and I'm still dealing with the immigration process. Right, it takes about a year and a half for her to be able to come to this country. Just to give you an idea of what a lot of families go through. I practiced immigration law for a couple of years with the Southern Poverty Law Center when I was in Georgia, representing asylum seekers and other immigrants in detention. And then I made my way back into the policy space. Initially, I'd started as a young activist, a community organizer in South Florida, and then I moved to DC, where I initially, as a very young advocate, I started to see, well, so many things. I'm happy to elaborate on a little bit later, but part of it is a lot of people who have never been in my shoes were very quick to negotiate on behalf. The way I saw it was on behalf of my community, and I wanted to be part of those conversations. That's what led me to say, I want to go back to law school, want to practice immigration law for a couple of years, want to come better prepared, and then come back to DC. And that's where I am now for about 3 years now, and that's the work that I'm doing.
Okay, thank you, Diego. As you can see, we have three highly experienced and well-informed panelists up here from divergent perspectives. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim, then Teresa, and then Diego to respond to the question on the table. Is immigration an unsolvable issue? And I'm going to give each of you 5 to 6 minutes to respond to that, so then we can have conversation among ourselves. And of course, we're going to open it up to questions in the last 30 minutes or so of this session. So Jim, is immigration an unsolvable issue? 5 to 6 minutes.
I think it's one of the most solvable of all issues facing America. So I react. It would, I understand why people say that, because we haven't had much progress. So that's why you would ask, can we not make any, right? But it's, since immigration by definition means people from outside the United States coming into the United States, and since the government of the United States controls virtually all those movements, and the Constitution gives clear authority to Congress to set immigration policy. So as compared to some other issues in America, it's not so clear who can decide, et cetera. So this is not like something you have to have government, local government working with federal government, working with civic. No, the Congress sets it all. So everything that's wrong with the policy, however you want to define what's wrong with the policy, blame on Congress, I say, because they're the ones who have the authority. It seems immigration is in bad shape. That's because Congress hasn't done its job, and so it's allowed a lot of dysfunction to happen. There's been a lot of fighting between our various groups, and just about everyone who's involved in immigration. That's partly on us for not getting together and smoking the peace pipe maybe earlier. That's why I'm here at Braver Angels, by the way, because I'm tired of fighting with no result. I'd like to get some improvements for our system, but I'd say it's not on us or any of us that Congress has become so dysfunctional and has given away so much of its power and then not used the power it has now. Well, the Supreme Court just gave Congress a whole bunch of its power back, so we'll see what they do now. But anyway, the Constitution gives Congress the authority. Congress sets the rules. The problem we've got is that Congress has not modernized the system. I tell people we're trying to get Congress to modernize the American immigration system for the 21st century. The only problem is it's not even in the 20th century right now. I'm trying to get them to get it to the 20th century so that we can look at the 21st century. It's an old creaky system. it's based on assumptions that were made in the 19th century, really. And the last real do-over of the system was in 1996, and even that was kind of just massaging it at the edges. The system was really put in place in, I'd say, 1965 as we know it now. And that's old, right? The whole world's changed dramatically, stupendously. Technology has changed. Cost of transportation has plummeted in this period of time. So much easier for people to come here. And then again, social media itself has changed immigration a lot. We can go into more of these things and to the economics that drives the whole process. I'm not talking about that yet, except for that one statistic I gave. And but it is complicated, and don't want to say any of this is easy. But there are solutions, and Congress needs to act to modernize the system. Maybe we'll all agree on that part.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I'll turn it over to Teresa now. Let me repoint the question a little bit, and maybe I might circle back to Jim for a quick response after Diego and Teresa speak. But is immigration an unsolvable issue? Would also be good to hear what you might propose to solve it if you believe it's not unsolvable.
Let me say this. I've been working on federal immigration policy for over 30 years. Some time ago, I made a promise that I would not retire until I saw Congress enact substantial change. My husband is now saying, "Did you really mean that?" Because he's retired. And I keep wanting to say, yeah, in part because I feel like it's not getting any better without change. And it doesn't matter how you think about the system right now, nobody thinks it's improving. So we have to figure out a way to solve it. I agree with Jim. It is fundamentally on Congress to make those changes. A lot of what we're seeing now is efforts by presidents of both parties to try to make changes to how immigration law functions without Congress making changes to the laws, and in very different directions. And so what that means is that from one president to another president, we have wild swings in how our immigration system operates. That's not a recipe for anything good, in my opinion. When you have inconsistency of policy, it's really hard to see what the outcomes or impacts of those things are going to be. We have an increasing level of involvement of our federal courts in deciding immigration policy, because people who don't like whichever way the administration has put in place a policy decide to take it to court. And so courts then intervene and say, oh, yep, that policy can stay in place. Nope, that can't. Or today it can stay in place, tomorrow it can't, the next day it can. That's how the court system works, all the way up to the Supreme Court and sometimes back down again. It takes years for that litigation to resolve itself. And now we have states and localities inserting themselves into what had been a very federal policy on immigration. So, states deciding that they're going to start putting their own people on the border to enforce the border, or states deciding that they're going to grant some sort of state-based status to immigrants who are there rather than waiting on the federal government to do so. This, again, results in a lot more inconsistency throughout the country and increasing divergence between different levels of governments. And so I look at what's happened in the last decade just, and you see states suing the federal government suing states, states are suing localities, localities are suing states, the legislator is legislating against city ordinances, and the city's fighting against that, and everybody's fighting in Washington, and that's not a ground for solving anything. So we have to find a way to kind of pull it back to some real conversations and not this idea that it is unsolvable or that that we have to like fight it out in order to win. Because that's not a recipe. Oh, I take that back. This shouldn't be about winning, right? Governance is the process of integrating divergent viewpoints and balancing interests. That's what I learned when I was inside government. That's the job of government, and we've failed to do that, I think, by governments of both parties. So we need to get back to understanding what governing means and how you do that, and less about my side has to win and your side has to lose, whatever issue it is.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. I'm going to turn it over to Diego now. Let me just interject. I feel like so far, which is, I'm not complaining, we're kind of setting the table. And I don't want anyone in the audience to feel too anxious that we're not going to get into more substantive aspects of the issue. We are, but with that, Diego, give us your take on things and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Do I think it's unsolvable? No. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. And I love that the topic of the convention and even from our skit yesterday, it's hope, right? And I think for me is that hope that we're building those relationships, that we're having those conversations, that we're starting here, right? It starts with this. It starts with you. It starts with us having these kind of conversations, because we are the ones that are motivated and mobilize our elected officials, right? And substantively, I mean, one of the things that I would point to, and something that is time sensitive, one of the dreamers issues, the DACA issue that I heard some folks that are in this room were talking about during the debate. This issue is being litigated in the courts right now, right? The program was ended by former President Trump. And ever since then, it's been stuck in litigation. Right now, it's before the Fifth Circuit. And the issue could come up as soon as next spring or summer before the Supreme Court. So what we're hoping, personally, and this actually as an organization as well, is that if the Supreme Court were to strike down the program, and we think it will, hopefully that would motivate our politicians to get their act together and negotiate. I personally thought that in February, when we had a bipartisan group of senators who were working on a border proposal that was in exchange for military aid for Ukraine, Israel, etc. I thought that was going to happen for a second, just like I thought in 2010 the DREAM Act was going to pass, just like I thought in 2013 and 2014 the Comprehensive Immigration Reform was going to pass. 2018, I thought we were going to do it again, right? And 2022, Cinema and Tillis came together, proposed a framework, and we keep getting close and close and close and close. And at least I focus on the lessons learned from those moments to say, you know, we need to continue doing the work. And I think that we need to bring politics and make it local again, because I think a lot of the power and a lot of this work, we're all based in DC. We need to come back and do those roundtables and do those conversations in the middle of Idaho, in the middle of Iowa, in all the districts in the states. I think that something that could potentially a good negotiation, a good compromise would be something that was included in the Senate border bill. For example, part of what it did was try to address with all this pressure, that all this mess that we're seeing at the border, right? Adding resources, adding more immigration judges, adding more asylum officers, heightening the asylum standard, increasing the asylum standard, expediting the asylum cases, right? I don't know if you knew, but asylum cases tend to range from 8 to 10 years to get resolved, right? So that's part of the backlog, is part of the frustration. And I think a border security bill that would do those kind of things, so we address, and I think that would satisfy the part of the conservative base, right? How do we address the immediate need right now at the border? Is by adding those resources, by changing or modernizing the asylum system in exchange for something like DACA. DACA right now affects approximately a little bit over 500,000 dreamers. These are folks who have built a career, bought homes, built families, started businesses, and they could potentially they could face in the next year or so, the likelihood of losing their work permit. And what is that going to do to our economy? What is that going to do to our families, et cetera? I would include as part of that compromise, not just DACA recipients, but in the 2022 framework that Senator Tillis and Senator Sinema worked on, it included a broader, larger class of dreamers. It was about 2.3 million or so. These are folks that came to the U.S. When they were minors, younger than 18, that have gone to school here, that we've educated, that have gone to universities, et cetera. So I would actually say not just focus on the DACA class, but I would make it a little bit broader.
Okay, thank you, Diego. I think you brought us just to where I'd like us to be, and I was going to ask to start off on a substantive aspect of things, precisely at DACA, and you laid out a couple of things. Might I ask you, just because it's not always clear how informed our audience is, just quickly, without repeating what you just said, what we mean by DACA,
Yeah.
who's got it now, what they need to keep it, and then what's being also added on.
Right, and sorry, I should have clarified that. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was a program that was implemented under the Obama administration. And about approximately 800, a little bit over 800 people benefited from that.
800,000.
800,000, thanks. And over the years, just because either they were adjusting their status or they were no longer eligible, right, the class of DACA holders just became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think it's going to continue to do that. And so DACA benefited those folks who, I think at that time, they had entered by 2007. They had been in the country in June 15 of 2012 when the announcement was made. So they had been here in the country, right? They were younger than 30. Was it 30?
Younger than 30
Yeah,
when they
31.
applied, younger than 16 when they arrived.
Right,
There
when
was
they
a
arrived.
series of requirements.
And so it provided work permits, right? And through the work permit, you're able to apply for a driver's license. So that was the first time that I got a driver's license, was when I was 23 years old. So I was driving without a license for 4 or 5 years because I had to go to school. And it, through that social, you're able to start building your credit. So that work permit, you have to renew every 2 years, right? And it's $495 to renew every year. I hope that helps. Okay.
How do you feel about, Jim, if I might, how do you feel about DACA and where we should go with it now? How that might figure into a broader arrangement?
Yeah, so DACA, again, refers to people who were brought before 2012, is it? And they were younger than 16, I think, when they were brought to the country. So the thought is it's not their fault they were brought to America. Let's cut them a break. And so DACA does two things. It defers, they can't be deported for that reason under the program if they're a part of the program. And second, it gives them work permit. So, it's a compelling case. We've always thought that the DACA program, though unconstitutionally enacted or not enacted, mandated by the president Obama, nonetheless, these people have a good case, and we felt that if we could pair that with something to help prevent future DACAs being necessary and future enormous waves of immigration, we should give an amnesty for that. Something that might be fair would be mandatory EVerify for every American business. Now, EVerify is something that's been on the book since 1996, and it's spread and grown. President Obama mandated that all federal contractors and subcontractors, I believe, use EVerify, which is all colleges, hospitals, and lots of other things. So
You want to tell us a little, elaborate what EVerify is?
thank you. Right. EVerify is a system that basically checks that your Social Security card is not fake. It draws on two existing databases, one by the Department of Homeland Security's and the other by Social Security Administration. And it somehow does its magic, and it makes sure you're not making up the number. It does that really well, and it tries to make sure that you're not using somebody else's number. And that's a little bit, they're still working on that one, but
Not as strong on that.
not as strong, not as strong. It's hard.
It's not a magic solution to undocumented employment. I'll say that.
However, right, it isn't. I'll say that, but I'll say I'll give many caveats to that. It's not perfect, but many employers, including my local grocery store, one day which had no American Black employees at all, but it had many immigrants working there. And one day, I mean, in one day, a lot of the immigrants disappeared, and American Blacks were working at that Safeway grocery store. And it's like, what? Oh, EVerify was put in at that grocery store. So the thing is, a lot of people who are illegally present in the United States won't go to a place that they know they're going to be EVerified. So it does make a difference. And the Federal Reserve of Dallas did a study on several states that do mandate EVerify for most or all their businesses, and found out that it caused a decline in the illegal populations, especially the newest arrivals in those cases. So that's what EVerify is. It just tries to make sure that people who are not presently here can't work here, because you've got to be legally present to work in America, unless you have some special dispensation, which is hard to get. So anyway, the reason we have all this illegal immigration right now, this massive, well, there's a lot of mistakes been made by a lot of people, but especially the Biden administration has made just one mistake after another. And in the last 4 years, about 10 million people have come in illegally, and are in a number of statuses. Either they've gotten away, or they've surrendered and said that they were going to put in a claim for asylum protection, or various other things. It's a long story of all the ways, but it's about 10 million people now.
Now, Jim, we're getting a little bit beyond EVerify.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm saying, why don't we? Yes, you got me going though, Peter.
It's all my fault.
A good trade might be mandatory verify, as I said, for a DACA amnesty. Why? Because one helps people who were brought here through no fault of their own, and without status. It gives them status. It's on a track to citizenship. Takes care of that, but it puts something in place that will help reduce the future illegal immigration. Because why do people come to this country? Overwhelmingly, it's for one reason: it's jobs.
Okay, so thank you, Jim. I skipped over you, Teresa. Please forgive me. There's one lingering question I have about EVerify, and then we can move on. So, do we have EVerify or not? I mean, I think from what I've heard so far, people in the audience might be confused. Can you clarify that?
EVerify exists in law.
Yeah.
For most employers, it is optional to use, but let me explain what that means. Under law, it is required that every employer verify the identity and work authorization of every employee they hire. And most of the time that is a paper-based form. Anybody here who's applied for and gotten a job had to fill out a form called an I-9, and you have to show a piece of identification, government-issued identification, and usually something that says you're allowed to work in the United States. If you're a US citizen, that might be a Social Security card or a passport or your birth certificate. If you're an immigrant who doesn't have citizenship, it might be a green card, it might be a work-based visa or a work permit, along with a piece of identification. EVerify is an electronic system whereby the employer takes those documents that you've given them, enters it into a computer database, and checks with Department of Homeland Security for immigration documents and Social Security Administration for Social Security documents, that the information on those documents actually exists in those systems. They're legitimate information. It doesn't necessarily confirm that the individual who presented those documents is the person to whom those documents apply, which is why I said it's not a panacea. Um, it is voluntary for most private sector employers in the United States. As Jim mentioned, the federal government requires all government contractors to use it, and their subcontractors. There are some states that have mandatory E-Verify in place for all employers in their state, or for state-based contractors. There are localities that require it. So it's not universal. It's not mandated by the federal government that every employer use it. Any employer can. Oftentimes, if there's an employer that has been investigated by Immigration and Customs Enforcement for employing undocumented workers, as part of a settlement with the government, will agree to use E-Verify going forward, for example. So that's how E-Verify works. It is another level to confirm the documents that are presented, because this requirement of documentation was put in place in 1986 as part of the amnesty in 1986. It was the flip side. But it was quickly found out that as a paper-based system, there were a lot of ways that people, well, two things happened. One is you had employers were now put in the position trying to look at all kinds of different documents, like the list of documents includes like 30 different documents that people can present, and try to judge whether or not those are valid documents. Employers are not experts in that. And two, it also to prevent employers from illegally saying they're only going to accept US citizens when other people who aren't citizens who are able to work should be eligible for those jobs, couldn't overly ask for things, couldn't prescribe. So, for example, it's illegal for an employer to say, you must present a US passport to get a job here. That's illegal. They have to say, you have to present a valid identity and work authorization document, and you get to choose what it is. So these kind of legalities that were meant to prevent both undocumented employment, but also employers from excluding people who were able to work in the United States, ended up with a system that frankly didn't do very well at either. This is what happens when the government tries to regulate things. Usually it doesn't work perfectly in any way. There's always balance. So E-Verify was created in 1996 to try to improve that system.
Okay, thank you,
That's the
Teresa.
explanation.
Yes. We and much more could be said all about this, but we just got a good briefing on this. And what is floating around here among the three panelists, I think it's fair to say, is the potential of a bargain, one bargain that might get things going, whether here or even in Washington, a compromise whereby there would be some reinforcement and elaboration of DACA in return for an enhancement of employer sanctions.
Can I just comment on that deal for a second?
Please.
So in the 30 years that I've been working on immigration in Washington, D.C., there's been a lot of attempts at what's called comprehensive immigration reform. This is a concept that was really developed in the mid to late 1990s. And as it was conceived by a diverse group of people working in the immigration space, was that it would cover three major areas. It would address the status of undocumented people in the United States through amnesty or legalization, pick your term. It would increase border enforcement and or employer sanctions to try to reduce future illegal immigration, but it would also modernize and change the legal immigration system. And we haven't talked about the legal immigration system here yet at all, but I can talk about that if we want to. But that was considered key because, as I think everybody here agrees, one major reason that immigrants come to the United States is for work. And like it or not, we have a huge economy with a lot of jobs, and E-Verify or not, people find work. People are able to work. That and they're able to work under the table or above the table or with fake documents, but people find jobs because we have jobs to offer them, and that happens. And even with EVerify, that will probably still happen. And if we don't, but our legal immigration system does not allow legal pathways to meet economic job openings in the United States. So people come illegally and fill them, right? I've heard some economists call it's the black market for jobs, right? Overly restrictive system, lots of availability and demand, and people go outside the system. That's what's happening. What we've kind of come to in the last, I want to say 7, 8 years in the immigration space is that comprehensive immigration reform has kind of been redefined by the people in Washington who talk about it to be this trade-off of enforcement, EVerify or border, for legalization for some or all of the undocumented in the United States. What's less discussed is where legal immigration reform fits into that.
Mm.
And I would argue that whether or not there's a political deal to be had between enforcement and legalization of whatever population you talk about, if we don't look at our legal immigration system, we are not addressing future immigration needs in a way that would reduce that incentive for undocumented migration. It's got to, enforcement alone is probably not going to do it as long as our economy is still the economy it is. And we've seen that because if you look at rates of illegal immigration at the US-Mexico border as a proxy for overall migration in the United States, and compare that to the labor market in the United States, job openings, it's remarkably correlated. So we can try to enforce our way out of that dynamic, but I would argue that enforcement alone is not likely to completely reduce unlawful migration unless we have alternative lawful pathways to fill that economic need. Now, I'm not saying that's exclusive, like immigrants are the only people who can fill that need. That's not true. There's a lot of other things. But I feel like the fact that we don't talk enough about what updates we might need to our legal immigration system, and this is where Jim and I can probably get into a debate because he may think differently than I do. But unless we address that, I'm not sure that whatever political deal could be put together would really change the future dynamic of how immigration is operating in the United States.
Okay. Diego, I don't want to have you feel excluded at this point, but I know Jim is going to respond to that. Can I let him go and then we'll let him go and then we'll hear from you? Okay, Jim.
Well, my perspective is different. I mean, these forces Teresa's talking about, and Teresa really knows. She's very, very learned in this subject, and so I don't question any of her facts, but I guess my perspective's a little different, and I might have a little more faith in something and a little less faith in something else than she does. But I do have a little more faith that EVerify can be improved. If it were mandatory, it's like how many businesses fail to pay the Social Security tax they collect from their employers to the federal government. Actually, almost none fail to do it. And the ones that are in prison, because actually when the government wants to do something, it does it. And I think this is a matter of perspective, but I think we've been conditioned to think that the government can't regulate something when really the government is not trying that hard to regulate it. If it were seen in our national interest. Now, I think it is in our national interest to keep illegal labor out. And here's the part that's really might rub a little bit. But I think it's in the national interest to keep to reduce the supply of especially less skilled labor coming into the United States, legally or illegally. Not eliminate it, but reduce it. Why? Because there's 2 or 3 reasons. The first one and most obvious right now is when Biden became president, we were 10 million housing units short in this country. And we've added 10 million people to the population plus natural increase. Since then, what's the big thing we're hearing about? What's the big undercover issue in this presidential campaign? Housing costs. When there's market forces, when more people are bidding on the same housing stock, it goes up. The price has risen dramatically. Rents for poor people, working people, dramatically up. Why? There's so many people who need that housing, right? Prices of hotels in New York City, dramatically up. Why? 1/5 of hotel rooms in New York City are housing immigrant populations that have come and are seeking shelter there. So the real world issues. And just one other thing I wanted to say.
One other thing, because we want Diego to weigh in.
Pardon me?
One other thing, because we want Diego.
One other thing. Okay, I get one more thing. Gee. I agree that there are lots of jobs, but why the jobs exist for the people they exist is the real question. Our labor participation rate, which is, before I got involved in this area, I'd never heard of that, right? It's like a baseball statistic. You have to sort of know the game, but labor, right? So how many people who are of prime working age have a job? That's the labor participation rate. And in the year 1960, let's see, is this men and women? But it was, I'm not sure. I think
You're trying to look at a chart on a phone. That's terribly difficult.
You could stipulate that it's lower.
It's lower now than it was then, and it's been going down for many years.
Right, for high
I will
school,
stipulate that.
for high school graduates, it was 95% in 1960, and it's now like 85%.
If we keep Diego waiting much more, he's going to be one of those unemployed. So
I've got more to say, but it's just complicated, and Diego needs a share of time.
please, Diego, take it away.
Man, I mean, I feel like if we had to, in my ideal world, I would completely redo the immigration system. Realistically, I don't know if that could happen, right? We were having conversations about, okay, so who would it serve, right? How would we make it work? And then you have the conversation about, well, think about the political environment that we're in now, right? And I don't know what could get through, right? I really feel for someone like Senator Langford, who stuck his neck out in negotiating the border deal in February and have his own party turn his back on him. Now I am worried that another Republican will come forward and try to negotiate again. Because why would you sacrifice your political career, potentially? I don't know that he's in trouble, but why would you do that? Why would you stick your neck out if your own party is going to turn your back on you? I wish we could redo the entire system, as we were having a conversation earlier that we would do that. I think that, and I'll stress it again, I think that the where we start or where we continue this work, I think we have to go back and to locals, right? Make this issue a local issue again, by having those conversations with folks that we may not agree with. And I could tell you a little bit about when I started as a young activist. And what I kept being fed by the organizations in DC when I started was Republicans are racist, Republicans are this, Republicans are that. And I lived in Miami, mind you. It was pretty, Miami right now, I think, is red. But when I grew up, the way that I started to evolve in this cause was by having those conversations with people who didn't think the way that I did, right? It was really reaching out and making sure that we're being intentional of working with both sides of the aisle by having those difficult conversations with people who didn't think like us, right? And when I started having those conversations with some of the more conservative Republicans in both in the House and the Senate, I was like, oh my God, we have a lot more in common than I thought we did. And I was like, if only people on my side of the issue would just be open to having that conversation with the other side instead of talking past each other, right? And I think that's what's missing. It's
Peter said something when introducing this panel that I think is worth noting. There are folks back in DC, for Diego especially, for me a little bit less so because I'm in the middle, who would absolutely be terribly upset that we are sitting on the same stage as Jim Robb. But completely mad. Why in the world would you share a stage with that organization? And I think, you know, the reason I came here today, the reason we have started having the conversations, honestly, if we sat down in a room, could Jim and I come to agreement? Probably. Would that be where Diego is? Maybe not. Like 2 or 3 people can usually come to an agreement. 20 people, a little harder. 40 people, maybe even more hard. 435 members of Congress. Where do they come to agreement? It's hard without a process. And that's what has stopped. The people in Washington who work on these issues, there is no process to come to agreement, to even try to come to agreement. And that's why all of us are here, is we all go, you know what? I'm not going to be able to retire if we don't have some kind of process to have the conversations. So I think, you know, we can talk about the details of what's on the table, what's off the table, what the immigration system looks like. I can tell you about 7 different times we've tried comprehensive immigration reform and exactly what was in every one of those deals and why they failed or not. The reality is we need to get back to having a process to be able to have the conversation, to figure out where those deals could happen. And this is where I agree with Diego, incentivize our members of Congress to do that. This is a secret in Washington that is very well known. Nobody in Congress actually ever wants to vote on anything. They don't want to take a vote. Why? Because the minute they vote on something, they're taking a position on something that somebody can hold them accountable for. And so they don't want, so the best bet in Washington, I get asked this question all the time by media people. What do you think the chances are that Congress is going to X? Well, if you ask me the chance that Congress will do nothing, it is about as close to 100% as you can get. The chance they will do something, maybe less than 1% on any given issue on any given day.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. On that,
I'm marking you down as a sunny optimist, Teresa.
I'm a sunny optimist.
So I want to turn it over to questions now. I just want to observe and point out that it sounds to me like, Teresa, you were the one who was arguing we have to get beyond this simple deal.
This simple deal.
The simple deal between you know, DACA and employer sanctions. We have to look at the whole legal question. It's Diego who's opting for the more minimal approach.
Maybe.
Diego, supposedly our activist fringe here. So that's just points to what an interesting trio we have here.
Yeah.
And I think the makings already of a really interesting and important dialogue moving forward. So thank very much the 3 of you. We've barely begun to scratch the surface of this, but I'm eager to hear your questions. So please raise your hand. And
Looks
why
like
are you
there's
pointing over that way, sir?
There's a person with microphones.
Pardon?
So make sure you get a microphone. So you can't hear him, but we want to hear you.
David Lapp. There's a woman right there beside you. Please tell us who you are and ask your question.
I'm Kim Stanek. I'm from Oregon, and I'm independent for a long, long time. But a very important issue. Everybody's all over the map on it. But each of you, if there was one thing you think is the most important thing you would change or get changed if you could get it changed, and I understand the gridlock is why we're dying as a country, what would that priority for each of you be?
Oh, you mean like one reform?
One reform you think you'd really love to hit? One reform you'd really love to hit hard?
I would get mandatory EVerify to help us get the control of the border situation.
Okay.
He wants to hear from each of
Well,
us.
I'm not sure we're going to have to go through each one answering every question, but go ahead.
I'll just say that I get asked this a lot and I have such a hard time with it. And it's probably because I know too much about immigration and everything impacts everything else. So it's really hard. I would say today, and I don't know what the exact answer is, but today I would say we need to get Congress to pass new legislation to address asylum at the border. In all of those years of comprehensive immigration reform, the border piece was just more agents and more walls. And that doesn't address what we're seeing now.
Okay, there's a question over on the side, the person who just stood up. Yes.
Sure, I'll go
Oh,
quickly.
I'm sorry, Diego.
So if looking at the success of the DACA program, I would expand those protections to the larger class of dreamers, right? So they can also put their degrees to work, so they can also start their businesses, they can also buy their homes and continue to build their families.
If you want to direct the person who's standing up, yes.
Yes, thank you. Teresa, question for you. You had mentioned that one of the reasons there is no passage of a bill is that there is no process that congressmen and women follow. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So how many people grew up watching Schoolhouse Rock? Okay, I'm just a bill, I'm only a bill, describes the congressional process for how a bill becomes a law. Except that's not how they do it at all. Not anymore, anyway. That's the way it's supposed to work. A bill gets introduced, you have hearings in a committee or multiple committees on it, so the members learn about the issue, develop their perspectives, then they mark up the piece of legislation and have amendments in the committee. The committees are supposed to be the most knowledgeable members of Congress on those issues. Once it comes out of committee, it goes to the floor, and then more amendments might be offered by members of the floor, so they get to participate in the process. Then it goes to the other side of the Capitol, and the same process happens over there. And if they pass different versions, then they come together in a conference committee, negotiate the differences, pass it again, and then it goes to the president. All of which takes a lot of time and is very difficult, which is why most bills never become law, but some do. What happens now is that because that process is long and requires members to take lots of different votes along the way, go back to what I said earlier, they don't want to do that. So what tends to happen is you have either leadership of the party or a certain gang of members get together and negotiate a full bill, and then maybe they have a hearing on it, and the hearing is about how do I poke the eye of the other party and pin it on the other party's fault why we can't get anything done. It's not about learning a lot usually. And then we mark up the bill where one party defeats every amendment from the other party, and then it goes to the floor, but we don't want to have really open amendments on the floor. And we will vote on it only what leadership wants. And we'll have a manager's amendment that completely rewrites the bill that was sent out of committee. And then if it passes, it goes to the other side of the Capitol Hill. And because it's a messaging bill that will never get signed into law, it just dies. And the only things that get enacted are bills that are negotiated essentially between the leaders of the parties and the White House. And most bills, and so the production of Congress, the number of bills enacted, has been on a steady decline for about 20 years. So the process that's supposed to work to do all this is just not, it's not happening. And members don't stay in town long enough to actually get to know each other. They fly in on a Monday night or a Tuesday morning, and they fly out as soon as possible on Thursday. And they rarely get together with members of the other side of the aisle. They have separate lunches from one party and the other. And so they don't have opportunities to actually talk to people on the other side of the aisle to talk about these issues. Congress is really badly broken in many ways right now. And that's impacting not just immigration, but a whole host of issues. And again, where do they get the pressure to get back to legislating is from all of us.
Diego?
The only thing I would add to that, in addition to all that, is that because of how toxic the issue of immigration is, all the negotiations now are happening, they're very secretive, right? Because we are so quick to kill the deal that we don't like in DC. And I just want to mention that because it's been happening more and more. and that's one of the things that worries me about the process, that just because of how afraid they are of what, the groups are going to say, the special interests, their constituents, et cetera, the process is so secretive.
Yeah, I hear from members, you probably heard this too, members are like, I could maybe do something, but I'd have to have a whole lot of people alongside me. And what can you do to protect me from the attack ads that I'm going to get for doing anything on this issue?
Well, on these highly, I agree with what you're both saying. And I mean, that was a seminar on but she's exactly right. This is how it's done now. And, the secret negotiations and all of that. And we know why they're necessary in today's climate. But I think for work to pass, for things to, meaningful bills to pass Congress today on any contentious issue, you've got to have a combination of, of people getting together who are policy experts on it and coming to some consensus and selling it to the country, and then Congress feels safe because they won't do anything if it's not safe, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing. And they are not leaders, they're followers of the American public. So we need to work out our differences. All of us on this stage, plus a much bigger group, are all agreed that we are in paralysis now. So I think we need to start, and we are trying, working out our differences, no matter how long it takes, and then sell it to our constituencies, sell it to the country, and then Congress will say, oh, well, it's easy. Sure, I'll vote on it 10 times. So it isn't going to be easy, but we really, really have to have some change.
Okay, David, you have a question back there. All right, please stand up and tell us who you are.
Hello. Sorry. I think this is close enough. Okay. Sorry. Hi, my name is Eduardo. I work for a NGO for farm workers' labor rights in North Carolina. A question I have is, so basically, if you kind of trace what has curtailed stronger labor power in the United States, it's mainly been like anti-racist. I'm not anti-racist. It's been explicitly racist policies in the United States. It was when we had slavery, slaves, and those types of laws were used to curtail labor power. Then after that, we had Jim Crow and all other types of anti-immigration policies. And so even right now, when I hear you speaking about labor participation and just all these things economically that people are dissatisfied with, I see these more as signs of there not being enough labor power rather than just us scapegoating immigrants again. So a question I have is, what would you say to those who see the border and just all these attempts at just creating classes of citizens would say an EVerify system is racist? Like, why would you say that that's not racist? Just from everyone on the panel, I just curious.
Well, it doesn't ask about race is the first reason. No, it is ethically agnostic. It's concerned about legality, not ethnicity, and it's far from racist. It's almost anti-racist to want America's poor, who are disproportionately ethnic people, but not hardly exclusively, to be able to have a right to a reasonable chance to get an American job. And that's the purpose of EVerify. The purpose of America's immigration system should be to serve the American people, which does include businesses. It does include, but it also includes workers. And workers, neither party, far as I can see, since my time in Washington, really cares much about workers. America's parties, Congress, all of we interest groups, we're all made up of people from not super elite backgrounds necessarily, but we're elite now because we're in Washington yesterday, here today, who knows where tomorrow. And the people who are struggling to make it, they just want a chance at getting a job and someone not undercutting them by coming in more and more people to get the same jobs. There are plenty of jobs. I mean, Teresa, I say the only fact type of thing that I've taken maybe a little issue with, you said, is that there are plenty of jobs. There are, but sometimes those jobs come open by displacing American populations, pushing them to the side. It's not like you're fired so I can hire this immigrant. I don't mean that, but I just mean in the aggregate, cheaper workers are preferred. So as long as there's a limitless supply of cheaper workers, businesses will go in that direction.
Jim, you're an illegal immigrant. You jumped the line on me, but that's okay.
Sorry, Peter.
Teresa?
I will say, here's what I will say. As somebody who is ingrained in immigration, and immigration is my issue, immigration is not the cause nor the solution to all of America's other problems. Okay? You know, we have a lot of housing problems that predated the arrival of the new immigrants. Did they exacerbate it in the areas they've arrived? Yes, but we're not going to solve housing just by saying, oh, get rid of the immigrants. We have business and labor issues that have been longstanding, as you rightly pointed out, that are separate from whether or not immigrants are participating or not. And even if you kicked all of the immigrants out tomorrow magically, we're still going to have those issues because the United States still hasn't figured out where it falls in that dialectic between employers and labor. The economy is not stagnant. Our economic issues, our debt issues are not going to be solved completely with immigration, but immigrants are not necessarily the cause of the kind of displacement you're talking about. There's a lot of other reasons that are there. The problem with those of us in the immigration debate, because it's our issue, is that we want to make it all about immigration.
Say that again, please.
The problem with those of us in the immigration debate, because it's our issue, is we want to make it all about immigration because that's how we incentivize the solutions we want. But the reality is it's not. And so I want to be a little bit humble when I talk about solutions because there is no perfect set of policies. Every policy has consequences, some foreseeable, some unforeseeable. And one of the challenges I think we have in the United States versus a country, earlier today somebody was talking about the Canadian system. I'm quite familiar with the Canadian system, having lived and worked there, as well as having a Canadian husband. The biggest difference between their system and ours is it's much more flexible. They change it regularly, like every 2 years. They decide how many new immigrants they want, how many don't. They base it on some new economic analyses. They change categories. They change priorities. They change temporary visas. Our system, as Jim rightly said, the framework of it was 1965. The legal immigration system last updated in 1990. Our enforcement system last updated in 1996. And in spite of what lots of different presidents have tried to do, those fundamental pieces can't be changed except if Congress changes the law, which means it's inflexible. That itself is problematic. Most other countries that are immigrant receiving countries, they update their immigration systems every 2 years. Every 2 years. I think that is what's needed. We need to revisit these issues on a regular basis. One, doing so makes them less polarizing, I think, less impossible because we're required to do it. But two, it creates that national dialogue on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. We have a question down in the back with the gentleman who just stood up.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to get the fundamental definitions correct and the framework correct. So by immigration, you're actually referring to three things. That's my framework question, which is legal immigration, like the lady in the middle has been talking about, DACA, and asylum seekers. Now, I've heard you all speak. So my question is that framework correct, or do I need to add another element in thinking about it? And the second part of this is I've heard you all speak about DACA and legal immigration, and thank you, because the legal immigration piece that you just elaborated on offered me a perspective that I never understood. But the asylum seeker issue is one that I don't think you've commented upon.
Right.
And I'd like to hear your perspectives.
Okay,
Thank you.
Diego, you want to take that?
Sure. So I've represented a lot of asylum seekers for about 3 years. And yes, I have seen people take advantage of the system, just to put that out there. Do I need the system needs to be changed? Of course, right? Because we have, like I mentioned in the beginning, a backlog of 8-10 years of someone that's coming to the country, whether you came to a port of entry or you came through the border, right? Whether you entered without inspection, right? The fact of the matter is that there is a right to seek asylum. And for folks that, whether they get detained, they get released, or they do it in an affirmative way, right? The backlog is so big and it takes so long to make a decision on the case that it needs to be completely changed. I don't remember, Teresa, what was the change was in the border bill from February? Was it to, was it 6 months?
6 months.
6 months.
Most cases should be decided within 6 months.
Yeah. Do you want to continue?
Sure. I think you're correct in some perspectives. I mean, obviously, we have a large undocumented population already in the United States before the most recent arrival of asylum seekers. And that's another question, not just DACA recipients or dreamers, but long-term undocumented immigrants, many of whom have been here. Actually, the statistics I understand on it is at least half of them have been in the United States 10 years or more. Almost a third have been in the United States 20 years or more. Majority of them in what we call mixed status families. So an undocumented person married to a US citizen or with US citizen kids or married to a green card holder. So that's another group that we have to figure out what we do about. On the asylum seeker, to put a finer point on what Diego said, here's what the Immigration and Nationality Act or immigration law says. A person who arrives in US territory, regardless of how they arrive, whether at a port of entry or between a port of entry, is allowed to ask for asylum. That is our law today. What does that mean? That means even if you enter illegally, you can ask for asylum as a defense against being deported for that illegal entry. That's what we call defensive asylum. If you come at a port of entry and you're allowed into the United States under a parole, or you come in on a visa and you later want to ask for asylum, you can make that asylum claim to US Citizenship and Immigration Services affirmatively. That's called, you file directly with the government and say, I want asylum. Two different ways of doing it, both of which are allowed under our laws, and both of which are severely backlogged. Previous to, say, 2014, the number of asylum seekers at the US-Mexico border was probably less than 5% of all people arriving at the border. It was a tiny number, and almost all of them went to ports of entry. There were a few that would come in between ports of entry when they were told they were going to be deported, said, oh, I want to claim asylum. It was manageable. It was manageable with the resources we had to decide in our immigration courts. It was manageable with the resources we had to detain people. Starting in 2014, we saw the arrival of families. We saw the arrival of people not from Mexico. We saw the arrival of many more people saying this asylum, I want asylum. And what we have seen since is just a complete overwhelming of our system of deciding whether or not you get asylum, whether it's in immigration courts defensively or USCIS. And it has only gotten worse. So there's a resource issue. But then we also have to ask whether our law that says you step foot on US soil, you get to ask for asylum, remains the right thing. Now, this is really contentious. And I'm not saying I have the answer, but it is a reason that people continue to come to the United States because they can't. Well, let me make something also clear. You cannot apply for asylum at any US embassy or consulate anywhere in the world. You have to be in the United States to ask for asylum. You can ask to be a refugee, but then you have to go through the United Nations. We don't have processes in every country to process refugees. So we have told people, if you want asylum and you can't become a refugee, come to the United States. That's what our law says.
Jim, do you want to weigh in
Yeah, I
on this
do.
important
Just as,
aspect of this issue?
right. It's like I think the most important thing we haven't said so far. This has become a crisis throughout the industrialized world. Every advanced country is wrestling with this. What has happened is the word has gotten out on the street, and I mean every street of every country, that this is a way you can get into an advanced country if you go there, get across the border and read a little speech, whatever is locally acceptable. And it's massive fraud. There's, of course, some legitimate cases, but enveloped with massive fraud. It's happening everywhere in the world. The only thing we can do about it is, well, we can act unilaterally as a country, but that's going to be trouble. We really need to renegotiate these treaties that were developed and agreements that were developed after World War II in response to situations that were very appropriate, so that we would not have a repeat of the Holocaust and other situations that developed in World War II. So now we've got the difference is the worlds we have now could not be more different. But then communication was sporadic and uncertain. Travel overseas or even across a desert from Mexico to the United States was hard, difficult, and few tried it. Now all of that's been solved. We have human guides. They're called coyotes often in this country. We have cartels that handle illegal trafficking of people. But of course, with this, not and this is not asylum particularly, but with all this unregulated traffic of people, we get the poor people who are smuggled in as slaves, as sex slaves most usually, but also other kinds. That's happening throughout the world now. When you lose control of your borders, you lose control of a lot of things. It's very important that we commit ourselves to this for the protection of a lot of people, including people who bring smuggled in against their will.
Okay. We have time for one, maybe two more questions. Andre, front here.
Well, I wanted to thank the panel for all the information that they're giving everyone. I think it's really important. Teresa, I wanted to talk about one aspect of the asylum process that wasn't mentioned. When they claim asylum, what has happened in the past is that they had to be detained. They weren't just released into the United States. And the way that the Biden administration has evaluated the law, they have decided to start releasing people into the United States instead of detaining them. And that interpretation has never done before. And we have seen that it's overwhelmed cities. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all, you know, understand the asylum law as it's been written, but we've taken a different policy decision and it's being applied differently. So the other thing that I wanted to address to the panel
Andre,
was
maybe that's one question's enough, if I can
okay.
ask you to leave it at that.
Can I just, so let me be clear. In the past, not all asylum seekers were detained. Some were not. We also have a challenge with who is coming and asking for asylum, right? So previously, a lot of it was single adults. We started seeing families arrived. We have some court cases that limit how long we can keep children and families in detention. There is also a limit that Congress sets on how many detention beds and facilities the government has in any given year through their appropriations process. When there are more people arriving than we have places to put them, any administration, doesn't matter what party, will do releases. The Trump administration released people into the country also. So there is a real resource question. Also, once somebody is in detention, they can apply for parole or release from detention in immigration courts. So sometimes they get released that way. This is one of those, and there's a lot of debate in many places about whether detention of asylum seekers is a good thing or a bad thing or should happen at all. There are people who believe that asylum seekers should never be detained. Our law, you're correct, particularly for people who arrive without authorization, does require detention. But no administration has ever been able to detain everybody under that criteria because we simply didn't have sufficient resources to do that. One thing I will say, and this comes from somebody who was inside government at Customs and Border Protection and saw it, and Department of Homeland Security. Honestly, whatever process Congress mandates in what we call authorizing statutes, in the immigration laws and authorizing statute, has to be interpreted by the executive branch in light of the resources that Congress gives it. So any process, whatever process it is, can easily be overtaken when there's not enough resources to apply that process to everyone for whom it's supposed to apply. That's where every administration of every stripe has always had to make decisions. This is what you sometimes hear the term prosecutorial discretion. That's a legal term, but what it basically means is we don't have enough money or resources to apply the law to everyone. So we have to decide who we apply it to and who we don't. And courts have said, yes, every administration has that discretion because Congress has not seen fit to give it enough resources to apply that law equally to everybody. And that's true whether it's a Republican administration, a Democratic administration, it doesn't matter. So I put it back on Congress. If you say this is the law that has to apply, you have to give the government enough resources to do that thing. And when you don't, they will have to make choices and you may not like the choices they make.
Okay, well, it's 3:01, and I think we should probably bring this to a conclusion. I realize there are a couple more questions out there. I'm sure our guests will stick around. Okay, I was saying that I thought you'd stick around for a few minutes if anybody wants to pose you questions one-on-one. Thanks all for coming, and thank the panelists for an extremely enlightening, civil, and engaging conversation. These are hard to come by, so thank you. Thank you.